So what were the medical conditions during that time period? Did you have doctors, hospitals that would accommodate you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
The only time anybody really got sick, they'd go to Freedman's Hospital.
Oh yeah, Freedman's
in
Hospital,
Washington.
You know, because my mother got sick down there, and that's what they recommended. Said it was the best doctor. In fact, Dr. Clune said just that. Marguerite, if I were you, I would take your mother to Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. They have black doctors, but they're the best doctors in the world. So that part, wasn't that bad. But Stephen, Dr. Phillips, I think, visited your house. They would come, back in the days, doctors would come, but you had to be pretty sick. But anyway, they would visit the people,
Were they white doctors?
Oh, they'd be white doctors. We didn't have no black doctors down in that area.
I remember my grandmother told me about Dr. Starkweather. He'd had a great big barrel in his office. And if you went in with a headache, he'd give you a pill out of that barrel.
Sugar pill.
And if you went in with a stomachache or whatever, he'd give you a pill out of that same barrel.
A handful of sugar pills that said they didn't know that. That's what they said.
And we had a midwife. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Miss Melvina was one.
Miss Melvina and Mary Danesfield. Yeah.
Were they white or black?
Black.
They were black.
Yeah. But they delivered babies for black and white. Oh yeah.
So the whites would let a black midwife deliver
yes,
the baby.
at that time, you didn't have any choice. Yep.
The white people had a choice, but they still knew we did it the best.
Yeah, but they didn't have a choice either, because at that time, you can't wait to go all the way into Alexander, someplace to have a baby.
And then think we was such a thing in those days as poor whites, So poor whites did what we did.
A lot of people don't think of that, but yeah, that's
right.
Yeah. Well, what did your grandmother and grandfather do in Occoquan? Did they own their own land, or were they farmers, or what did they do?
My grandmother was a day worker. She worked for Captain Joyce, and my grandfather was a barber, and he was the first black barber in Occoquan. And
but he cut white people's hair.
Yeah, cut white people's hair. Couldn't cut black people's hair.
So he worked in a white barber shop?
And he was the only barber.
Oh. On the front
He
street,
was the only barber in
Hall
Hall Street. Yeah, he was the only barber, but he just couldn't cut black people's hair.
So what did your mother and father do?
My father was in the military, and then when he got out of the military, he was in the Navy. He went to work at Fort Belvoir. And my mother did days work until she went to Fort Belvoir and worked.
Did your grandparents or your parents have education, elementary or high school?
My mother did. My mother went to Garney Patterson in Washington, because most of all the high schools and things, the schools were in Washington. So that's where everybody had to go to school, to go to Washington, go on the train.
Right.
They catch the train.
In those same coal cars.
Segregated. They were segregated.
Yep.
That's right. They had
So
junior high, you had to go to D.C.
So Mother Harris, how about your grandparents and your parents? What did they do?
Well, my grandmother was a housewife, you might say, and my grandmother picked chickens, and she was the best chicken picker in Occoquan, we thought, because when she picked chickens, she picked them for the white people. And she would singe the chickens, to make sure there wasn't any feathers on them. There would be any feathers on them, and wash them. I can see them now in the pan, and my brother and I would deliver them to the white people. That was one of her ways of making money. And my grandfather, we called back in the day when Papa was, we called it piddling work. So he really worked for John Larry, and whoever was there before John Larry, he sort of piddled. Then later on in life, when the war broke out, he was able to work at the field yard in Belvoir. So that was what my grandma. Now my dad was a laborer in Washington, D.C. He worked for Charles H. Tompkins. My mother was, if you saw the movie, The Help, my mother was one of those. My mother wore a gray uniform with white collars and cuffs. She wore a black uniform when she served dinner in the evening, black and white. She got off at 7 o'clock in the evening. Well, they served dinner at 7. She got off at 9. to come home to be able to look after me. So my father really had to be the one to sit there when he got off his laboring job to fix the food and to see if I got my lesson. So that's how that was in that time.
What time did her day start?
Oh, in the morning, my mother was going out to work before 8 o'clock. But one thing about my mother, she did make sure that the lady who came in, the young girl, schoolgirl, you know how you make money, would come in high school, I guess she was, Frances. They were, you know how you didn't want to go to school, so you got your little job. And she would see that I got my breakfast that my mother had already prepared. My mother working for the white people, she gave me poached eggs and grapefruit, like slicing the grapefruit around, you know, making it with a chair. That's what she did do before, because that's the only time I guess she really had for me, really. So she'd have that on the table when Frances would come in. And I went to school just like Joyce, and we had books, and we were tickled to death when we got those books, because we were getting books in D.C. with the backs off of them, you know. We thought that was great. We didn't know any better. You know, we didn't know any better. So when we got the books, when we opened up the boxes, well, the books we couldn't actually use, the teacher would discard some. But when those books came in, we had something to learn from, so it was that part. But, yeah, that's what my mom and dad did in those days.
Could you all go to the public libraries, or?
I could in D.C. I could go. That was one thing. That's one thing that we did have. We could go to the library at 7th and New York Avenue. That's where we'd go to get our lesson in the evening when we didn't have books at home to get from, which I didn't. We'd have to go to the library, right down the way you go to where the stores were, Hans and all those stores were. That's where that is.
My aunt, by being a teacher, she set up a library in the school, and we had a junior league. We didn't have PTA or PTO. We had a junior league. And every month she would sponsor a tea, I guess you'd call it, where the parents would come, and she picked several parents to bring food. Miss Almeda Williams, my grandmother, Rhoda Harris, a couple of them, they would bring food. And each one of them would bring books that they had from their home. And she would get the books. And I would be the one to catalog the books. She showed me how to catalog them. And we had a special area in the school where she taught us how to check out a book. And during the summer, each child was required to take one of those books home. And you had to do a research on the author, read the book, tell about the book, tell what it was about. What would you have done if you had been in the situation in that book? And then when you got back during the fall, then you reported on that book. Now this was in elementary school. And she did everything that she could so that we wouldn't have any problems in getting a job, because from the time that she taught all the way through high school, the main theme was that you become a responsible citizen and that you would be able to take care of you and your family. It wasn't planned that way, but that was the way that they started out.
Did they ever talk about civic duty, like voting or trying to register?
Yes. We talked about it, but we never, did. We would, in school, we would have dummy elections because you would elect, your class president or whatever. But other than that, no, it wasn't.
Did segregation ever make you all feel like you were second-class citizens?
Not.
Or did you ever think about that?
No.
You had other things to think about other than that. You were thinking about, what were you going to wear to school, or what was going to be for dinner, or what the friends were going to do, what were you going to do when you got home from school, or something like that. Because the white and black kids played together. We did everything together. They'd come over and spend the night. We never were allowed to spend the night at their house. But they'd come over and spend the night. Other than that, that was it. And the only time you really, really got involved in it was when you went away from to someplace else.
Traveling
Where they didn't know you.
Yeah.
What was it like traveling on the bus?
Oh.
You either set up, you stood up, or
you knew that when you got on that bus, like I would go down there on the bus, go down there on the Greyhound bus, and we knew that when we got on that bus that we were supposed to sit in the back. You didn't have about 5 seats in the back,
That's it.
but you knew that. But you would set up near, you're not near close to him, but you sat about midway, knowing that they were going to get on later as they went along those stops.
Mm-hmm.
So you would get, but I've seen the bus driver when we would sit further up than he thought we should. When the white people were going to get on, they hadn't even got on. They were going to get on.
Yeah.
He'd be standing there looking at you, and you knew what he meant. You knew to get on back where you belong. I don't think anyone actually, I didn't see anyone actually say it. You knew it just from the look on their faces that you belonged in the back. And you did the same thing in Alexandria, really, when I went there. The ABNW was sitting in the back of the bus. The blue law was still in existence then. And so you knew that's where you, what's the old saying? You knew your place?
Mm-hmm.
And they meant for you to know your place, you know, with where their actions were.
And if the back part of the bus was crowded where the
Oh,
blacks
you stood
sat,
up.
you stood up.
You stood up.
If you had to go from there to Alexandria or to
you
Washington
stood
or New
up.
York, you stood up.
Even if the front part where the whites were was empty.
Yep, you stood
You
up.
stood up, yeah.
Any other recollections about Occoquan or?
I can't. The only thing I remember, my daddy was talking one time. They used to go. It's in the middle, just down from Woodbridge Senior